Hello and welcome to your next episode with me, Louise.
And me, Amy.
And in this week's episode, we've got Dr Ria Lina on the show, who is a virologist. And she's also a stand-up comedian. So we've asked her to put all her hats on and explain all about the virus, the vaccines, the tears and everything, and make us laugh at the same time, haven't we, Amy?
Yeah, she was brilliant.
But really worth noting that none of this episode can be taken as medical advice. You've got to see an actual doctor for that, your doctor, okay?
So, in other words, we're just like three women chatting at the pub, but the pubs aren't open, so we're doing it on a podcast.
That's right, yes.
Is that
yes.
right? But with somebody who has at least got a bit of sense between her.
I mean, she's informed and everything, but like we've got to cover ourselves, Amy, because otherwise we'll get somebody suing us because they'll.
You see, there's a lot of people who listen to this.
Yeah.
We do take our word as absolute gospel, so I think you're right. Actually,
there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that, Amy, and I'm not discouraging it. But what I'm saying is, it's not my fault if you get coronavirus or you
and your dying breath would be, but on your next episode. This is coming up after this.
I feel like I'm about to do an exam.
Oh. No. And if you listen, Ria, if you don't know the answer, just say to me, I don't know the answer.
Yeah, no problem.
Honestly, anything you're just like, I haven't got a clue about that. That's fine.
Okay.
But most importantly, we're going to have a laugh, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, because I was going to say to you, like, you know, you're obviously you're a comedian as well, aren't you? So we're going to be bombarding you with medical questions, and I expect you to make us laugh as well. I'd like you to wear all your hats all at once right now for us, please. Thank you.
I look so good in all my hats as well. I look so good.
Well, welcome, Ria, and thank you. No, as I say, you are a comedian, but today you are mainly wearing your doctor's hat. You're Dr Ria Lina, aren't you? And a doctor in virology. Is that correct?
Yes. Before I became a full-time stand-up, I used to work in virology.
Right.
So, but I should disclaimer, I focused on herpes viruses.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah,
what young girl doesn't dream of that?
Yeah.
So that was that was my specialty.
That's the perfect training for comedy, right?
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, it made for many an interesting conversation in the green room. Ria, can I just ask you a question? Don't show me. Don't show me.
Oh, brilliant.
So let's talk about sort of what's going on in the world today. We're recording this November 2020. We're in the UK. We're in the second lockdown, and the vaccines are coming.
Are we going in a time capsule? That was very.
Do you know what? Yeah,
I just thought it's November 2020.
I do fantasize about somebody finding this on an iPod. Or like a Sony Walkman.
An iPod?
Yeah.
That's two time jumps in time,
retro,
isn't it? They jumped and they picked up our podcast and then they jumped backwards even further and stuck it on an iPod.
It's Inception on amphetamines. What can I say? That's my thinking. But yeah, obviously there's lots of news unfolding, and I guess there's been so little new news for so long that when there's a gear change, isn't there, all of a sudden, on your timeline when something develops like this. This week we have seen the coronavirus deaths exceeding 2,000 for the first time since May, and the R rate that they're talking about is now around 1. So I guess the question is, what the fuck are the government doing letting us all gad about for 5 days over Christmas? What do you think about that?
I understand it, if I'm honest. I understand what they're doing, because they have to balance not just the physical health of the nation in terms of keeping us pathogen-free or pathogen-safe, but they also have to balance the mental health of the nation. Mm-hmm. And I think that played a lot into this decision, was how do we balance everything so that we can let everyone have 5 days with people that they might not have seen for the full year. Remember, we've all been keeping our distance and trying to play it safe since March. And so this might be the first time that a lot of families have even physically seen each other. So I understand the reasoning behind it. I understand the thought process of trying to find that balance, but it cannot be denied that this could spell out a difficult January for the entire country.
That's unavoidable, I guess, isn't it? I mean, I'm not particularly a Tory supporter, but they are in this kind of impossible spot right now, aren't they? They cannot please all the people all the time on all these issues.
No, but there's certain things they could do. They could tax Amazon, couldn't they?
Oh,
like they
for
could have
sure,
right at the
mate, for
beginning.
sure, yes.
They could have just
First
gone,
thing.
listen, we're all at home, we're all ordering from Amazon, but guess what? 20% of every purchase comes back to us, and we're going to give that out to, all the children who can't eat when they're not at school. There are ways that they could have, we're not going to just give 10 billion worth of taxpayers' money to our mates who then turn out don't know what they're doing when it comes to PPE contracts. There's a lot of things they could have done to maybe assuage the rest of us in times like this.
Absolutely.
But I'm biased.
Yeah.
I'm biased.
But do you think then that these Christmas relaxations are likely to cause a massive spike in January?
Yes.
Yeah.
To be blunt, I think so. But I think it's not in isolation. I'm worried about the huge movement around the country when university students go home for Christmas.
That was going to be my next question. Yeah.
And then when they go back again in January.
Yeah.
So we've got 3 sort of major events going on there.
Yeah.
Of movement of people coming together that weren't previously together. And actually almost more worryingly is if we could sort of Star Trek our way into just where they energize from one place to the other. What do they call it? Transport. If we could do that, it would actually probably be far less of a risk. But how are people traveling?
Yeah.
If you're driving in your car to your family, that's a lot safer. If your household travels only in your household's car to another household, that's far less of a risk than thousands and thousands of university students having to take trains and planes and buses. And that's,
of course. Yeah.
That's the bigger concern. So I have a friend who I said, are you going to go home for Christmas? She said, no, because I'm worried about that second train. It's not getting there is fine. Traveling home on the 23rd, not so worried about because people would have been sensible up to then. It's the journey on the way home.
God,
it's that 27th.
When they've all been having their festive orgies with
festive orgies. Yes.
With grandparents.
That's how we celebrate
That's what
Christmas.
I'm doing on Christmas Day, Ria.
Is it? with family. Is that a family thing?
It's a British thing.
My kids would be horrified if they heard that.
Well, it totally puts the cracker into a completely different...
But going back to students, so students returning from university. Now, what I've understood is that lots of them are being tested first and then more or less told, if that test is negative, that means you don't have it. You can go off, you can do whatever you like. But am I right in my understanding that the tests have high false negative rates? So would it be more advisable then if those kids if they've had a negative test to kind of disregard that and just come home, all students really, or people coming from other bits of the country, would it be more sensible for them to come home, isolate for a week before spending time with vulnerable family members? Because lots of our listeners will have university students coming home for Christmas.
Well, let's deal with the false negative part first of that. Let's be clear what that means. The false negative isn't necessarily about the test not working. It makes it sound like the test isn't very good when you say loads of false negatives. What that means is that if you test somebody on one day, we're going to test let's say we all test today on Friday, okay? And all 3 of us come back negative. That does not mean that we therefore never have had it, never will have it, don't currently have it at the moment, but we're right at the beginning of infection and it hasn't built enough to be detectable in the body. All we have is a snapshot of one point in time. This is one of the reasons why they say don't come and get tested unless you have symptoms.
Yes.
Because if you don't have symptoms, then the likelihood is, more likely than not, we will get a negative test result, even though you might be at some stage in the disease process, but it's just not at a point where we can detect it. If you have symptoms, you're coughing or you've lost your sense of taste or smell noticeably, maybe your nose is running, then we know that you're at a point in the infection where we can probably pick it up and then determine whether or not you have coronavirus SARS-2 or you don't and you just have a cold or you have something else, because this test is virus specific. So the test is designed specifically to pick up SARS-2. That's where this high level of false negative comes in. But it doesn't mean that if we test all the university students while they're at uni and then send them off on trains around the country to go home, they could pick it up on the journey.
Yeah, lots of them are being offered 2 tests, but I was still hearing that there is an issue with the false negative thing again.
So that's the first part of it, is that remember that when somebody tests negative, this is not a carte blanche to go out and have fun for the next 2 weeks of your life. You still need to be careful because you are still susceptible to infection at any point in that time. For the second part of your question, should they come home? Should they isolate? Well, yes, ideally. That's the truth for anybody who's planning on getting together with one or more other households at Christmas. Ideally, be safe for the 2 weeks beforehand. Be as careful as you can, especially if you're meeting up with older or more vulnerable members of your family. That is the ideal. And even when you're all together in the same house or in the same place to celebrate, it still isn't an excuse to go around hugging and kissing everybody. Again, ideally, you're maintaining some kind of distance. You're keeping the place ventilated. I know it's cold, but, keep the windows open, keep the air flowing.
Can I also just ask another question about the tests? So I understood that also it depends on who's doing the test. So if a scientist does the test, then they still have just over 20% false negative rate. If a trained healthcare worker does it, that goes up to 27%. But when people read the instructions and self-test, it's a 42.5 false negative rate because they're not doing it properly, basically. It just seems like these tests are like a complete waste of time. Unless you get a positive test, you might as well just not bother. Do you know what I mean? You're not getting any information really from it.
Again, technically, yes, I suppose so. Like a positive test result is far more useful to work with than a negative test result. Because a positive one, then you know where you stand. You go, ooh, I need to isolate. I need to not go near anybody for the next 10 to 14 days. And then after that, and I say this and I caveat this strongly, but then after that, you know that you've had it. So the likelihood of picking it up and being as infectious or as contagious as you were the first time, the likelihood of having it as severely as you did the first time are reduced. And I say that, again, I caveat that heavily because we are still finding out about reinfection. There are people who, just like with chickenpox, there are some people who get it once and never get it again. There's some people who get it every time they're stressed. They break out in chickenpox or shingles. So every person is different. So we can't blanket say if you've had it once, you'll never have it again. We just cannot say that. However, once you've had it, you know that you have some antibodies. You know that you probably have a little bit more cover than your neighbor who hasn't had it yet.
Yeah.
I guess what you were saying before, Ria, which is worth reiterating, you shouldn't really be pursuing getting a test unless you have had some symptoms. So if you were having enough symptoms to go and want to get a test, you should also be acting sensibly, i.e. not going on a train.
Definitely. Yes. And the purpose, again, of getting a positive test, as much as interesting and as informative as it is for yourself, this is really where we want that whole track and trace system to kick in.
And that really cheap one, the really good bargain one that we got.
Oh, the one that works at a local level. Yeah, the one that's a dream. The one from Lidl. Yeah, that's probably why it doesn't work, because we got it in the middle aisle of Lidl. Just randomly, how about this track and trace system?
It's next to the paddling pool. It's got to work, right?
It's got to work. It's run by a peer. And everything run by peers work. We all know that because they're the best, aren't they? That's how the hierarchy works in society. So it is one of the reasons to go get tested when you're symptomatic is actually to feed into the bigger, and I know people hate this idea. It is to feed into the statistics, but it is to try and help, especially those areas that have local track and trace have been proven to be quite effective when it's run by the local council or people who understand their area or know how their community works best. Those are the most successful track and traces. But the idea, again, is to track down everyone you may have been in contact with, see if they can figure out where it is that you picked it up to just try and stop infection spreading. That's really, because if it wasn't for that system, if you have any symptoms, just stay home.
Yeah.
Just stay home and wait till it clears.
Yeah.
Because that will effectively stop the transmission from you. You will stop giving it out to anyone else. If the moment you have a bit of a cough or a bit of a tickle in the nose, you're like, right, not sure what this is, but I'm going to stay home. Because what's interesting is that we were worried in the spring that when the autumn came and flu season came, that the hospitals would be doubly overwhelmed because they'd have everybody suffering from flu and everybody suffering from COVID if we weren't careful. But actually what I was reading, and again, until the figures confirm this, please take this as anecdotally as possible, but I was reading that because we're all self-isolating, we haven't had the same flu numbers that we would otherwise expect to have, because we haven't been close enough to pass flu on, because flu transmits in a very similar way. But it actually, we believe with flu, you have one day before it really hits you where you're contagious. So flu doesn't pass as quickly. Like, the problem with coronavirus is that with this SARS-2 is that people are passing it on without knowing that they have it. It's that much more, it's more easily transmitted. Whereas with flu, you've got an idea. You're feeling a bit crappy already. You're like, oh, I'm not feeling so great. And so flu can be more easily contained simply because once you have flu symptoms, that's it. You're in bed, you're knocked out, and you're not giving that to the community at the supermarket anymore.
And easier to say, oh God, that was yesterday when I was in that sweaty club and that girl next to me was sneezing. Like, it's easier to be able to just track what you did the previous 48 hours. Whereas obviously with this, it looks like was it sort of 10-day incubation period?
It can be up to well, this is why we say 10 to 14 days, please stay in, because we're looking at a 10 to 14 day incubation period. Most people, 5 to 6 days from receiving it to developing symptoms, but it can be up to 10. And there has been some anecdotal evidence right at the beginning, which is why this 14-day period exists, because there were some people that it took a full 2 weeks to show up.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess going back to our previous thing about families getting together. So if you're an older person, spending Christmas with your family without a worry, it's just not going to be the same, is it? It's not going to be the same Christmas. You're not going to have the little one sitting on your knee, and you're not going to have Granny playing Twister in her usual sort of athletic manner.
I'm coming round your house next year. Wow.
It's a blast.
Granny sounds great. Well, it won't be the same. Again, it comes down to, I feel like we're talking everyone out of having a lovely Christmas. And I remember what I said at the beginning, that the whole reason for this is to balance out mental health. And there's a lot to be said for the healing power of happiness and family and all of those things that go together. Because we're not just battling this virus, we're battling people being, huge waves of depression. People are losing their jobs. People haven't been able to pay their rent. There's huge other health considerations to take into account here. And even my own parents, and I quote them a lot, but my own parents said, we would rather, if this is going to kill us in the next 2 years, we would rather live those 2 years than spend the next 10 years indoors, not getting sick, but not seeing our family. So it's down to, with each individual family, it's down to those conversations, it's down to those households saying, okay, Granny, Grandpa, how do you want to play this? Because this is, because you don't want to be the reason you've lost your grandparents. Nobody wants that. I mean,
when you're saying it's down to, I really disagree that it's down to grandparents and the older people, because the way I look at it is that, I'm in a situation where I've got kids in their 20s and one teenager that's going to school, and, they're like pretty much, I guess, super spreaders, aren't they? And then I've got my older parents, and I feel that it is my job to make that very unpopular decision to say to my parents, which actually I haven't had to, I'm very lucky because they kind of get it, but I feel it's my job to protect my children from being in a situation where they could, in the absolute worst case scenario, have a really terrible cross to bear for the rest of their lives, which, when we're talking about mental health, is going to really impact their mental health if it turns out that they've been with Granny and Grandad at Christmas and then they've dropped dead because it turned out one of them was carrying coronavirus and didn't know about it. So I kind of just feel quite strongly about that, and I'm not sure. I just can't see a way round thinking any other way, really. But you're talking about mental health issues, and you've got to think about these old people with their mental health issues as well. It's very complex, isn't it? There's no right or wrong, is there?
Well, I think again you've highlighted an interesting viewpoint that has to be considered. When I say I think it's up to every household, this is what the government has done. They've decided that it's up to us, every group of 3 households to decide how they're going to play it, what they're going to do. If you're going to get together with with elderly and vulnerable. Remember, it's not just the elderly, it's also the vulnerable. If you have someone who's diabetic in your family, if you have someone who's overweight or struggling with other heart conditions, they're also at risk here. But what I mean is that it's up to you to decide how best to keep them safe and how best to manage everything going forward. Because as you said, you've very consciously made the decision to protect your children against what could be, a horrendous cross to bear for the rest of their lives. And it's how you do that. It's how do you isolate for the 2 weeks before Christmas? How do you, if you are getting together indoors, how are you doing that? Do you put, Granny near an open window? In order that the air that they're breathing is the most circulated, and then pile the blankets on, open window, pile the blankets on, keeping all of that balance. Yeah,
absolutely. I think people need to realise that just because it's like keeping within the rules for you all to be getting together, that you need to absolutely be aware of how to do that safely and take responsibility for that. But I bet people won't. And then in January, they'll all be blaming, whoever decided they could get together at Christmas. There's a real, like you say, that balance of, being told, OK, this is like the restrictions are going to be relaxed. And then, but also, like Boris Johnson's not my mum. I mean, I need to, make my own informed decisions about how I'm going to deal with that and do that, don't I?
Definitely. I think that this is the problem, is that when the rules get relaxed, people immediately go, well, the responsibility is on the government.
Yeah.
And maybe some people can live with that and just go, it wasn't me, it was them. And maybe that's where the blame gets shifted. But bottom line, the virus isn't in on any of these SAGE meetings. The virus is not sitting there going, okay, listen, I'll give you 5 days, but I want 5 days for every 1 day that you have at Christmas. What do you say?
I know.
She's a tough negotiator, Rona, isn't she?
Yeah, Rona's like...
She's a bitch.
She is. I mean, she doesn't go out after 10 in the autumn. Does she? I mean, she was all over the summer, wasn't she? She was just out there loving the sunshine.
That was her hot girl summer, I think.
She was leaving it alone. She was leaving it alone, but she was just like, listen, when it gets cold, I'm coming in. And, I also don't like loud parties. So if you could stop all of that, that's really harsh in my jam,
But I think it's really complex, all of it, isn't it? And people have got to be a little bit informed and take a bit of responsibility. I know that's going to annoy me. People are going to annoy me around Christmas.
Well, you'll have all that time to stew about it in January when you're locked down again. I know. 'Cause that's just definitely going to happen, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Regardless of how careful we are.
Extended podcast episodes on it.
Yeah. I could.
Special.
Yes.
Extra long.
Yes. About how cross I am.
Check out the 4-hour rant in January. It's just a solo episode of Louise.
It will be.
We'll put it on the iPod as well for the future people to pick up.
Absolutely. So I've got some other questions that people have sort of said, will you ask her this? Will you ask her that? So we're hearing of case numbers and hospital admissions coming down or levelling out in many areas. So why are loads of those areas having these new tougher tiers and being stuck into tier 3 if their numbers are levelling out or coming down?
You know what? I think that we're all asking that question, aren't we?
Okay.
We're all asking. No, but it comes down to this.
What tier are you in, Ria?
Tier 2.
Are you in London?
I'm in London, okay. So we're still in tier 2, which I think it kind of makes sense for London because the idea, we're trying to control it. We're not just sort of going, we did 4 weeks of it and numbers are better. It is about actively trying to reduce numbers. So the government doesn't just look at a static picture of where the numbers were at on the 2nd of December and make the decision. They're looking at a number of different factors per area to decide what tier to put them in. With the aim that we are looking to reduce the R number to below 1, which means that the rate of infection is actively shrinking. Right now, with it at around 1, it's staying the same. So every time somebody gets better, somebody else gets infected, and that's not ideal. They're looking at hospital capacity. They're looking at what the area can sustain, and they're looking at. Well, I mean, those are the two big things, and they're looking at. So the numbers can still be shrinking in an area, but if we don't keep the restrictions on that area quite strictly, then we could see that blow out of control quickly.
Right.
That's how they've determined. The size of the areas, I can't comment on. Like some of these areas seem, like they've put some very rural areas in quite strict tiers. I assume that has to do with their local medical capacity.
Yes,
I was going to say, in London, you've got so many hospitals within that, zones 1 to 5? There are so many hospitals that could deal with, like you say, the capacity. Whereas, we're in Kent.
We're in Tunbridge Wells. Would you believe it? We're in Tier 3, in Royal Tunbridge Wells. We're,
It's funny.
That's right. All of Kent has been put into Tier 3.
I know, because of Swale.
Huge.
Because of Swale. But I think,
Swale.
you see, when you're talking...
The Swelsh. What can you do about the Swelsh?
But I think when you're talking about your hospital capacity, of course, we've got a big hospital in Tunbridge Wells, which presumably is taking some, taking some of that load, or will need to. So, I can see the thinking around it. Then, I mean, yesterday I was livid, absolutely livid. But
it's funny. On my way here, I saw the local Kent News, like they're there with a camera and a microphone.
Is that the noise?
Yeah,
do they do their own?
That's the jingle. They've literally got Bob from Seven Oaks, and he just goes Kent News. And I was like, please approach me. Normally, you just want to avoid people doing vox pops in the streets, but I was going to sort of do my disgusted from Tunbridge Wells character.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I was really disgusted last night. I had to get a little bit pissed actually in the end last night because I was just to numb my sad feelings about being in Tier 3, which I know isn't healthy, but I quite enjoyed it. But it was really necessary because I was just livid. And when I got home yesterday lunchtime, put on the news, and I was like, "What the actual fuck? Are you kidding me? Not Royal Tunbridge Wells." I was, Anyway, there we go. I'm still
We're
obviously
royal.
Yeah, I keep dropping in the royal, because that's, we're special. Anyway.
But very, very humble, Ria,
yeah.
as you can tell. No, but I think you're right. It's the medical capacity.
Yeah,
that's one of the main factors, isn't it?
It's a huge part of it, because I believe that Brighton had very low numbers, but have been put into a higher tier than the Isle of Wight. And you have to look at transmission as well. And the Isle of Wight, to be blunt, even if it went raging through the Isle of Wight, is still self-contained. And the rest of Great Britain is okay. Whereas with Brighton, it's quite a highly populated area. So it's great that the numbers are low in Brighton, but it needs to, we need to maintain that. And we need to maintain that while reopening all the shops, pubs with substantial meals, and everything else. We have to keep that progress. So that is what the thinking is behind some of the tiers, but they are quite large swathes sometimes.
Yeah, but I'm glad you've explained that.
All of Kent is in Tier 3, and you go, okay, but
23
they know something
people.
about.
They were saying 23 million people are in Tier 3. That's obviously nationally rather than just in Kent. To your understanding, Ria, what are the settings where COVID spreads the most? Is it pubs and restaurants, supermarkets, or is it the household thing?
Okay, so they did a study. PHE released a study at the beginning of November, which was interesting and yet at the same time limiting. And the study said that they tracked a number of people who had infection between, I think, the 9th and the 15th of November, and where did they pick up the infection. And the overwhelming evidence was that they picked them up in supermarkets.
Wow,
the problem is that between the 9th and the 15th of November, we were all in lockdown, and the only place open were supermarkets.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So on the one hand,
it'll be the singles night at Sainsbury's that I've been going to.
Well, that's exactly it. But which aisle were you in? I mean, this is the key.
It was the tinned fruit. I was giving blowjobs in the tinned fruit aisle, and I think that's where those spike in figures have come from. She's speechless.
Yeah. I am speechless.
You can see why I've not been invited on Radio 4 to discuss this.
I would have at least... No, I would have done it in the soft furnishings myself, just for the knees. But tinned fruit, there we go.
Sorry, go on. But go on, you were explaining about why supermarkets...
So at the moment, that's the only place where people can mingle. In lockdown too, supermarkets is the only place that people would go. So that was understandably, it explained that. Second down from that was, there's household transmission, obviously, between people who live together, but bars and restaurants were quite high up, so they had all gone out. Because remember, right before lockdown 2, there was this mini surge of everyone going, we have to go out and eat before we have to cook for ourselves for a month. So there was this, especially in London where I am, you could feel there were a lot more people out that day before everything shut, as everyone raced around and just went, I have to buy shoes. Do you need shoes? No, but I can't
I know.
not buy shoes for a month.
I walked past like Topshop and I didn't even need anything, and I was like, oh, perhaps I should just like quickly go in while I can. I didn't, because I was just like, no, Louise, you don't need anything. But there was that feeling.
There was that. So I'm sure that was responsible for a mini spike. So essentially what we've learned from that study is that you can catch it wherever people go. That's the bottom line. Wherever people interact with each other or go. I mean, this is in supermarket shopping, you're not really interacting with others. You go in on your own, maybe with your partner. It's somewhere where we've always naturally socially distanced anyway. Nobody likes to stand next to someone in the supermarket and and pick tinned fruit. It's just awkward. You're judging each other. Oh, with syrup. Oh, I see. Okay, well, I get mine just with juice. And so we already naturally socially distance in the supermarket. So to see this study revealed that even in the supermarket we're seeing transmission tells us how careful we need to be. Because you don't think of when we first, back in the first spring lockdown, we were uber careful in the supermarket, weren't we? And you had to queue outside, and they had these grids on the floor, and you got, you glared at anyone who got into your grid. Get out of my grid. This is my grid, right? You can have this grid later, but for now, the meatball section is mine. It's just. And we've relaxed over time. The summer kind of made us a bit complacent. So now my local supermarket certainly doesn't have the queuing system anymore. No. They don't have the guy at the entrance going, there's your station, clean your basket, clean your hands before you come in. All of that's gone.
It's a fatigue though, isn't it? Do you think it is, if we, like you say, we've just become complacent? I don't know, is it just human nature to sort of, I've already washed my hands 6 times today. I don't really need to sanitize again.
Yeah, it is a certain fatigue. It's also when you get familiar with something. When you're first unsure about something, you're very, very careful and you follow the rules. And as you become more familiar, all of that sort of laxes. And we've been living like this for 9 months. Yeah. I don't know who's still washing their hands for 20 seconds.
No, I mean, God, do you know what? When all this first happened in March, I washed my hands so much that the skin cracked on my fingers. And like now, I go to the loo and I wash my hands. That's it. That's when I wash my hands. I'm like, oh, good opportunity to wash my hands. Then I won't do it again until the next time I go. Yeah. Really?
We wash our hands when we come in from outside.
Oh, well, I had that rule, but Ria, thank you for reminding me, because I need to reinstate that, because I was
especially now you're in tier 3, you dirty bastard.
I was really militant about it. And Ned used to come in, that's my 15-year-old, and he used to come in and I would say, right, hands up. He had to put his hands up. He wasn't allowed to touch like a door handle or anything. And I'd just be like, right, over to the sink, and I'd turn the tap on for him and squirt soap in his hands. And, I was really, really strict about it, but I'm not bothering at all now, but I need to, don't I? Yeah.
No, that I feel it like on my hands when I come in. I'm like, okay, because I allow myself a bit. You go around the supermarket, you're touching things, you're packing things up, you're doing a lot of touching. I definitely feel on my hands like I need to wash these before especially if you've just been to the supermarket and you're about to prepare food.
Oh, yes.
I go,
actually.
And do the 20 seconds.
I definitely do that. I don't do the 20 seconds. I've abandoned the 20 seconds or singing happy birthday or whatever it was. I felt like, no, but I need to do that again.
I said to my mother, because I wrote a little song right at the beginning for the kids to do, and I said, if you sing this, it's 20 seconds, and we all abandoned the singing, and my mother said, I just count to 20. Why can't people just count to 20?
She's old school.
Happened? Yeah, old school. Just count. And I went, that's actually genius, and it is the fastest and easiest and least insane way of doing it.
Yeah.
It was that Dunkirk spirit at the beginning, though, wasn't it? This is awful, but let's just sing about it. Well, it's so typical.
Oh, we love to sing in a time of crisis, don't we, the Brits?
Oh, indeed. Yeah.
Just wait till January once we've left the EU. Loads of singing.
Oh,
so much singing. Yeah.
Do you remember
you
when
singing for your supper?
No,
there was no supper.
Brexit. Do you remember that? The good old days.
Right. Back in the when that was the biggest of our worries.
There's another question we've got from one of our listeners here. How long will the vaccine provide immunity for? Do you have any sort of idea?
Nobody knows right now because bottom line, we can't tell you if a vaccine provides 5 years immunity until 5 years after someone's had the vaccine.
Oh, yeah.
It's as simple as that. You cannot predict that kind of thing. So no, we don't know. We don't know whether these vaccines will need to be taken annually, a little bit like the flu vaccine. We know that we're going to be living with this. This virus isn't going away. The difference is with SARS-1 and MERS, which were the two previous coronavirus epidemics that happened, where the whole world kind of went, uh-oh, and then it was controlled and contained in the areas that it occurred. And it never went from epidemic to pandemic. So with those two, they did sort of retreat again back into nature. So we haven't seen an example of either of those viruses in the human population since. But with this one, we know that it's going to be out there like the cold, like flu. It's going to be circulating. We're going to have to learn to live with this. And so we don't know yet how frequently we're going to have to vaccinate the population in order to make sure that it stays at bay.
Right. Yes, so that's all unknown at the moment.
Yes, it's not as simple as just, we'll vaccinate everybody and be done with it.
No, okay.
Although, in theory, if we could vaccinate the entire world at the same time, then we might be able to eliminate the virus in the human population, because it would have nowhere to go.
No.
It would just have nowhere to go. With this particular virus, though, because it's been jumping between species. It came from a species, we're not sure which one, back in Wuhan, back at the beginning. So it already jumped from one species to us. We've seen it jump from us to mink, especially. They've culled millions of animals in Denmark, which is really sad. And they're looking at the entire mink industry is having to examine. I don't know whether it will survive this, which doesn't completely upset me. Killing all those animals upsets me, but the idea that we're not going to continue to grow mink purely to make clothes doesn't upset me. But we do know that this jumps between species, so that's the other reason why, even if we could, in theory, vaccinate the entire population and eliminate it from the human population, that doesn't mean that it won't just sit somewhere very nearby in nature and wait for an opportunity. Because remember, every time somebody new is born, they don't have coronavirus immunity naturally. So we're constantly going to be adding to the population people that are susceptible to the virus. So there's, but this is why a comprehensive vaccination program is of interest to the UK, because it does allow us to at least go, okay, well, most of us, those of us that can be vaccinated, because remember, there will be people who legitimately cannot be vaccinated for various health reasons. And it does allow most of us to carry that immunity with us, or to carry that protection for the duration of the vaccine, however long that may be, in order that we can reduce its opportunity to run rampant in our society and try and get back to that normal that we remember, that Brexit normal that we were enjoying back in January.
Yeah. Thinking about the vaccine, now I've been doing a bit of research, and there was stuff that I've heard reported that I don't fully understand, but it sounds like enormous red flags to me about the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine trials. The American ones, as I understand it, is that the Pfizer and Moderna, is that correct? That they seem to have done these major vaccine trials quickly and properly. But things that I've heard about the Oxford one is, so first of all, there was this thing about the vaccine giving a half dose in the first injection and then a standard dose in the second one, and that led to better outcomes. But then also they did 2 trials instead of one big single trial. And then just sort of patch them together. This is what I'm hearing, and do tell me if I've got this completely wrong. So there was that. And then when they did the half dose and then a standard dose having better outcomes, but neither of those trials have been designed to test that theory. And that actually happened as a mistake. And it all just sounds...
Does it sound a bit slapdash?
It does sound really slapdash. And the other thing that I understand, and again, I might have got this wrong, is that for 50 years we were campaigning, I mean, mostly women campaigning, because of the disastrous effects that thalidomide had, on babies. And that was all sort of passed last year. Lots of sort of protocols and things agreed to make sure that never happens again, which, to my understanding, apparently that's all just been chucked out now because we've got to focus on really quickly getting this vaccine. But to me, I'm like, well, there's so many things from what I've read that, and I'm not an anti-vaxxer at all ever, but I'm going, well, hang on, for a start, surely during a pandemic isn't the time to be ignoring protocols and evidence that has built up over decades. Surely we should be paying attention to those even more now. So that's alarming me. And then also I'm thinking, is there some way that I can not have the shitty British one and go for the American ones that seem to have been done properly? So there we go. That's all the stuff that is going around my head. And I'm like, what? And I'd like just a little bit of like understanding on, I guess, and your opinion, so.
It's funny because there's the scientific opinion, but then there's also just the sort of political opinion of it all. Yes, the Oxford vaccine it's been on a journey. It's been on a journey that you wouldn't expect from a proper vaccine trial. You're right. They had two cohorts, one that got 2 full doses and one that got a half dose and then a full dose. And that half dose and then a full dose cohort were actually vaccinated with those doses by mistake. So they had changed supplier and they didn't realize that the dose they were giving was a half dose. And that is how they ended up with this second group. However, some of the most amazing discoveries in scientific history have been a mistake.
Well, fair enough, yeah.
Penicillin wasn't looking for penicillin. He found a mold, growing in his petri dishes, and it was killing the other bacteria. And he went, wait a minute, what's this? And we discovered one of the, that was one of the most monumental discoveries of modern medicine was penicillin. And through this accidental mistake, and they ran it by the regulators. They didn't hide it. They ran it by the regulators at the time. They said, this happened, but 2,500 people have been given this different dose. And the regulators said, okay, but at least we know it and we've monitored it and separate them out and watch them, keep them separate. And then they discovered through that actually that group does better.
Right.
That was actually and so it's one of those happy accidents that we go, oh, that was lucky.
Right, okay.
And actually what that brings to my mind as a scientist is going, hang on a second, can we go back to the Pfizer and the Moderna trials and do the same thing? What dosage are they not testing that maybe we should test to see if that we have better results? It calls up questions in both directions.
Right, yeah.
The Oxford trials are smaller. They have been working with fewer people than the Moderna and the Pfizer ones. And it has been different. But everything, if there's one thing that we can feel safe about, it's the fact that these trials are going to be scrutinized more than any other medical trial in history. So even though we keep, we hark back to like the thalidomide trials, which was horrendous crying shame that ever happened. And we've learned a lot of lessons from those. But the difference is that these ones, everybody's looking at them. No one was really watching the thalidomide trials at the time. There wasn't the scrutiny. Yeah. And because and think of all the drug trials right now that are ongoing that we don't know about because we won't hear about it until those drugs go to the regulators, are passed, and then are put on our shelves for us to buy. So there are tons of drugs that we've all taken in our own lifetimes that we've never once gone, yes, but can I just see the trials for this doctor, please? Can I just,
yes.
Right, there's huge amounts of trust.
Yeah.
So at least from these, what we can say is that, okay, they can't put a step wrong. And if anything, this Oxford trial has been scrutinized more than the Pfizer one. The Pfizer one, they just came out with half a press release and just went, hey, by the way, we're 90% successful. Aren't we amazing? And Moderna sort of went, oh, excuse me, sorry, hi. We're actually 95% successful. And Pfizer went, what? Actually, no, we're 95% successful, I think you'll find. Like it was just a bunch of mid-third trial press releases. And they went, well, here's our numbers. Well, here's our, that's all that was. They weren't finished with the trial when those figures came out. They are finishing up. They're coming to the end of it. It still needs to go through the FDI. We still need everything to go through our regulators over here. But if there's one thing that I think that we can believe is that all the data from these trials are available for anybody who wishes to read them. There are, to be fair, there are other concerns with the Oxford one as well. The group that got the half dose and then the full dose, nobody, I think, is over 55 in that group.
That was my other thing, was that I understood that they don't appear to have included many people over 55 at all, even though that group is especially vulnerable to COVID-19, whereas the Pfizer trial had almost like half of their participants were over 55. So why is that? What was going on there?
I don't know why it was that particular group that ended up getting the half dose. So I don't know if they specifically said, here's a group of people that are not over 55. Let's give them the new supply that we just got in. I don't know. Again, because that was by accident that they received that dosage, it might just be complete coincidence that no one in that particular cohort was over 55. I don't know that it was intentional, to be fair. However, what we've ended up with are results that we go, this is promising. Unfortunately, we don't know how this would affect people over the age of 55 simply because of who got that particular dosage. But my understanding is that Oxford is going to go back and do more dosage trials.
So we trust that there appear to be no short-term risks that we have seen so far. Like you said before, you only know what the 5-year risks are when we get to 5 years. That's such a good point. I mean, it's impossible to know any of the long-term effects, isn't it?
Well, you say long-term effects. Do you mean are you worried that people will grow a third arm in a couple of years?
I think a third arm would actually be quite useful because
wouldn't it
when
just?
I'm multitasking.
And if it were 2 meters long to help with social distancing, it would be
that would be helpful. What people have brought up who have got kids in their 20s is things like
infertility.
Fertility or autoimmune disease, things like that, or any long-term effect, whatever, I guess. But what I'm wondering is there something that, as that somebody, unlike a lay person who has no idea, is there something about the molecular structure or something that you can go, no, we know that there will be no long-term effects because of this? Or is it just that actually, no, we don't know, and we're going to have to just suck it and see, and 30 years down the line, let's just see how people are faring?
What we need to do is go back to the basics and understand what exactly a vaccine is. And I think that that's what we forget is exactly what it is that we're trying to achieve with a vaccine. Because it's developed in a lab, because we are picking apart bits of biological information from, we're taking virions, viruses apart and injecting parts of those into people. People go, that sounds so Terminator-y, doesn't it? It sounds like something from the future. And it is quite scary. But bottom line, and this is what to remember. Think about right now all of the thousands of people who have contracted SARS-2. What's actually happened in their body? A live, quite dangerous virus has entered their body and has, in the way that viruses work is that they, in order to replicate, need to use your cell machinery. So inside your cells is a fully kitted out machine that allows DNA and RNA to replicate. And our cells use our own machinery all the time in order to create proteins, in order to split the cell, in order to, for growth, for repair. We're using that machinery all the time. And what a virus is a virus is just a container of genetic information that doesn't have any of its own machinery. It travels light and it comes into your body, it goes into a cell, it uses that machinery to replicate itself. And then because of the way that it works, it actually replicates itself exponentially within a cell. And once that cell is bursting to the brim with new virus, it bursts and that it releases itself into your body. And then each one of those viruses goes off and finds another cell to infect, to replicate exponentially. And if your immune system doesn't get on top of that, you can see how quickly that infection could get out of control. Now, think of the thousands of people that's what's happened to the thousands of people that have had SARS-2 so far this year, is that this virus has entered the body. And depending on how severe your immune system reacts to that, is actually what determines how ill you become. So some people, the virus goes in, especially in the young and the children, as we've seen, and the virus goes in and the body goes, oh, that shouldn't be here. And it goes along and it goes, oi, and it picks it up by the scruff of the neck and goes, you should not be in here. That's it. Get out. And it clears up the virus pretty quickly. And they have pretty mild responses to that. They might have a bit of a sniffle. They might have a bit of a cough, maybe a fever for a day. But overall, they're not incapacitated. When we're seeing people that have to be let into the hospitals, people who are ending up on ventilators in ICU, this is where the body's had a massive overreaction. So it's actually the immune system's response to being infected that has led to them being so capacitated. And that's where this battle occurs in the body between the immune system trying to clear out all this virus. And sometimes it's an overkill. It's almost like the body marshals too much of its own army against the virus.
Right. Okay.
And that's where we end up, that's where people end up actually needing additional help and additional support. Because you remember things like mucus. Mucus is the debris of war. That's what it is. It's where you're clearing out dead cellular debris. You're clearing out dead viruses. You're clearing out dead parts of the immune system that have fought valiantly and died. That's what mucus is. And if it's filling up your lungs because you're having this massive battle and and there's debris everywhere, then you can't breathe. And that's where people might need extra oxygen therapy in order to help them get the oxygen that they need to keep going. That's what's going on. So that's what's happening in the body. A vaccine, the idea of a vaccine is to prevent that overreaction by pre-warning the body what a viral infection looks like. So already we are talking about presenting to the body something that is less severe, less dangerous than the actual disease itself.
It's almost like a dress rehearsal for the immune system, isn't it?
It's like showing a mugshot around the body.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing, is you're going in with a mugshot and going, you see this protein? If you see this protein, that's attached to a very dangerous virus. So if you just see the protein itself, we want you to get rid of it quickly. That's what you're doing, is you are pre-prepping the body for a much worse case scenario. It's like a practice run.
Right.
It's that, you know how militaries do practice war runs and they just go, okay, the army
like
versus
drill.
the Navy,
Yeah.
go like a drill. That's exactly what we're doing. So already what we're offering with a vaccine is an opportunity to prep your body with far less risk of the actual disease, because you're just giving it part of you're not giving the whole virus. You're definitely never giving the entire virion that's capable of replicating. We would never do that. What we're saying is, in the case of the Pfizer and the Moderna ones, what they're doing is they're actually giving the blueprint. They're actually sending the blueprint in for one of the viral proteins, just one protein of the whole thing. Because remember, a virus is made up of, it's got its genetic material in the middle, which could be DNA or RNA. Then it's got a casing on the outside. That casing on the outside is then going to have proteins stuck inside it. And it's those proteins that are on the outside that make it, that identify it for who it is. That's its face, if you want. And it's those proteins on the outside that are unique to SARS-2 that most of the vaccines that are being developed are focusing on. They're focusing on what's called the spike protein because it's shaped a bit like a spike. And that's what we're training the body to recognize, is just that protein. So both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines have got a blueprint, and they are essentially injecting into the body a blueprint. And they're going, hey, make this blueprint. And then the body goes, oh, okay. And it goes to a cell and it says, hey, cell, can you make this protein from this blueprint with your machinery? And the cell goes, yeah, okay. And the cell churns out hundreds and thousands of these proteins. And then, unfortunately, it'll probably burst and the cell will sacrifice itself for this. But now suddenly all of these spike proteins are running around the body, and the body goes, wait, what is this? This is not our protein. What is this protein doing here? And then the immune system comes in and goes, no, this is not okay. You are not from us. You should not be running around these corridors. And it shuts, it clears up all that protein. And then the next time, if the virus itself comes knocking at that body's door and goes, hey, I'm going to come in, the immune system will be like, I've seen that protein before. You do not belong here. Get out. And we'll attack it much faster. Whereas if we hadn't prepped the body and gone, hey, by the way, this spike protein shouldn't be in the body, what might happen is the virus comes knocking on the door and goes, knock, knock, knock. Hey, can I come in? I was just in the neighborhood. I was just thought, can I just have a tour? Just a quick tour? And the body's like, Oh yeah, maybe. Who are you? Are you Jehovah's Witness? What are you doing? Who are you? What are you? And before you know it, the virus has gone in going, can I just borrow your loo? Can I just borrow this cell? I just need to quickly borrow. And it's in.
Yeah.
And and then the body goes, oh, that's that. Oh, we shouldn't have let that happen. So it's about priming the body. That's what a vaccine does, is it is pre-priming you. So you've got to remember, when we're talking about side effects and everything else, often there's some people who are allergic to certain vaccines. They cannot have them. And it's not actually the pathogen information itself in the vaccine that they're allergic to. It might be some of the other things in there that it's packaged with that they're allergic to. You know that they grow some vaccines in eggs. And people who are allergic to eggs can't take those vaccines, not because they're allergic to that particular virus or that particular bacteria, but because they're allergic to the egg that it was grown in the first place. So a lot of times when people focus on a vaccine, go, oh, this is gonna, could this make me infertile? No, introducing this protein to the body to run this drill so that the immune system knows what it looks like, in no way has any effect on the reproductive system.
When I made that thalidomide comparison, that's completely incorrect, because that wasn't a vaccination. It was a completely different thing, wasn't it?
It was, but I think that the concerns were correct. I mean, with thalidomide trials, they weren't tested properly. I mean, back in the old days, that's not a good phrase, but drug trials for many, many decades were mainly conducted on men. They didn't they didn't even think to go, well, hang on, if we're going to make this drug available to the population, let's test it on a legitimate cross section of the population. And then after thalidomide was okayed because they never even considered that women have different biology. They never considered that children have different biology. Pregnant women, yet again, it's a completely different. Pregnant women are different to women. You have to consider them as two completely different testing environments. And it's tricky, because I don't know any pregnant women. I don't know a lot of pregnant women that would willingly sign up for a drug trial. No. I personally, I certainly would. I have children. I certainly would not have done that. I would have been like, no, thank you. I think I'm not going to experiment with my baby's life. Thank you very much. So it is tricky. But that is something that definitely we know about now. We're still learning. We're still overcoming a lot of the paternalism of medicine. We're still struggling with that. Women, it's known that women go to the doctor with maladies, and women more than men are told to shake it off. Oh, you're just being a woman. You're just complaining. Oh, must be that time of the month for you. Just take a chill pill and come back next week. We're still fighting against that in society. And actually, we also see that issue with race as well. Is that we recognize in a lot of the medical textbooks, if you look at a lot of skin conditions, all the pictures are of Caucasians. So it makes it harder to recognize a similar condition in someone who's black, that's black, because it might look different and it'll present differently. So we're still working to overcome some of these issues. But if there's one thing I can say about these vaccine trials, is that they are so openly, they're going to be so scrutinized by so many people.
Yeah. And understanding what a vaccine is, as that's put my mind at rest about there aren't going to be long-term side effects. That's not a concern then.
Well, this isn't a drug. This is a vaccine. Yeah. Those are two different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. To be fair, we have to take each vaccine as it comes, because the vaccines are different. Moderna and Pfizer both happen to be this blueprint mRNA vaccines. But the Oxford one is actually an adenovirus vaccine. They're taking a common cold virus from a different species, so one that doesn't infect us naturally anyway. They are then forcing that spike protein I was telling you about onto the surface of this particular cold virus. And they're using the cold virus as a means of getting that protein into the cell so that they can kickstart this reaction. So it's a different method of delivery. It's the same principle, which is, let's get the body to recognize this spike protein as bad.
Yeah.
It's the same idea.
That's so helpful, because I don't think I've learned as much as I have in the last sort of 7 minutes throughout my whole of my education, which is worrying. I don't know. I think I was just stoned for most of my secondary school education. But thank you for that. I think that will really put a lot of people's mind at rest. Can I just ask you, what do you, obviously you've just explained there about how the vaccine works. Do you think giving it to young people, sort of teenagers, those in their 20s, that would be relatively safe? Would it be useful though?
It's interesting. A lot of people are worried about children, and I've heard this question before, but what about the young people? Do we give to the young people? Remember that most of us are vaccinated with most of our vaccines in childhood. And the reason is because when you are young, A, you've got the best immune system you're ever going to have in your life. B, nothing affects you as badly. Remember, the younger you are that you get chickenpox,
it's milder,
the milder it is. You still build the same immunity to it. If you catch it, well, actually they say you need to get chickenpox over the age of 1 year for that immunity to stick. If you have it at 6 months, sometimes you can catch it again because you're just a little bit too young, under a year old. However,
but then when you get it at 12, it's just awful, isn't it? Yeah,
exactly. And that is because your immune system is just the best that it can be, and it comes in and it goes, oh, that shouldn't be here, get out. And also because you renew as a, you're still growing, you're still renewing more as a child. So I would not hesitate at all to give the vaccine to younger children, because the younger you are, the better I think you'll find, I think that they'll stand up and go running off afterwards. Whereas we've seen that some of the adults in some of the trials have said, look, after, the day after I had the vaccine, I had a massive migraine, or I had some body aches, and those are natural. All vaccines, I mean, anytime you have to go for a vaccine for anything, they will give you the leaflet and say, you may experience some of these side effects. And it's not crazy to expect there to be side effects. You are still actively activating your immune system. That's not going to be for nothing. I mean, our immune system's working all the time. We're constantly being bombarded with pathogens from the outside environment. For every cold that you catch, there were probably a whole bunch that didn't take because your immune system went, nah, I saw you last year, get out. Right. And then there's that one that just slips in there that you go, oh, I've got what's going around. So in terms of young people and children, I'm personally not worried about that. And in some ways, I think that's great because they are able to spread it without necessarily knowing that they're doing it, because their disease progress is so much more mild than it generally is in adults.
Well, I mean, I think do
you know what? I was just going to say, Louise, sorry, I just talked over you. We do this all the time.
I don't mind being talked over.
I would say, if you're listening to your next episode, don't say we don't give you anything, guys. Okay.
It's been so informative.
It has. And thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Yeah. And I mean, I've got loads of people on Instagram and things were pinging messages about, things that they wanted. Yeah. And I just think everything I've been asked, everything I've wondered, you've just covered the whole lot. So thank you so much.
Well, my work here is done. Yeah.
We'll put all your information in the show notes as well.
Great.
It's been lovely to chat to you. Thank you again.
It's wonderful. Thanks for having me.
A podcast from